Chapman Highway, South Knoxville, almost 10 at night. Laura Mitchell's Audi is dead, dashboard dark, engine silent, no shoulder to pull onto. Her phone is down to 8%. Headlights pass. 1, 2, 3. A fourth truck slows, then pulls onto the gravel. A door opens, work boots on stone. A canvas jacket streaked with grease. She recognizes him before he reaches her window. Keith Palmer. She got him fired over a small mistake. When her car broke down at night, only the single dad pulled over. He doesn't say a word. He walks straight to the hood. Before the story keeps going, if you've ever been the one stranded on a dark road or the one who almost didn't stop, drop a word below. Now, back to Chapman Highway. 2 months earlier, the first week of June, Keith Palmer was a fleet mechanic at Ridgeline Logistics on the south side of Knoxville. 3 years on the job. Not one incident. He kept 2 logs, one on the company system, one by hand, in a spiral notebook thick enough to double as a doorstop. He didn't trust a single record of anything. 22 trucks moved through his bay, and every one of them left with his initials in 2 places. In May, Keith found the brake pads on truck 14 worn past spec. He filed a maintenance request, 3 weeks running, 3 different requests, and each one vanished from the system within a day. He had no authority to hold a truck back. That call belonged to management. So truck 14 kept running, and Keith kept writing the dates down in his own hand, because somewhere in him he already knew the system wasn't going to remember this for him. Early June, truck 14 lost its brakes doing 45 on Interstate 40. The driver walked away. The cargo didn't. The truck came in on a flatbed with its front end folded like paper, and the report landed on Laura Mitchell's desk by end of day. Doug Kendrick, the company's senior vice president and chief financial officer, briefed her first. Keith Palmer was the technician of record for truck 14. The digital system showed no maintenance requests filed in the last 3 months. Palmer had signed off on the truck as safe without completing a proper inspection. Doug set the printout on her desk clean. No warnings, no red flags anywhere on the page. Laura called Keith in. Second-floor conference room, blinds half open. Doug standing by the window with his arms crossed. Laura had the printout in front of her, edges squared to the table. She'd read it twice before he walked in, looking for a hole in it, and hadn't found one. The system shows no brake maintenance requests for truck 14 in 3 months, she said. You signed off on that truck as safe. The driver nearly died. I filed 3 requests, Keith said. His voice stayed even. All 3 got denied. There's nothing in the system. I know what I filed. Keith looked at Doug. Doug looked back, hands flat on the table, not moving, not blinking. Keith understood, in that second, exactly what he was up against. His word, against a database. And the man who controlled the database, standing 3 feet away, saying nothing at all. He could have raised his voice. He didn't. Raising his voice wouldn't put the deleted forms back where they belonged. Laura signed the termination, effective immediately. Keith stood, didn't raise his voice, didn't ask for anything he wasn't owed. I've got a 9-year-old daughter, he said. I'll need a letter for the next job. Not a plea, just a fact he needed handled before he left the building. Laura nodded, already reaching for the next form in the stack, and only later would she understand what it cost him to say that sentence without his voice breaking. He cleared out his toolbox at the bay wrenches, a torque wrench, the notebook with 200 pages of his own handwriting, every page dated, every page useless now. 3 years folded into one steel box. His hands didn't shake doing it. A couple of the other techs looked over from their bays and looked away again, the way people do when they don't know what to say and are grateful they don't have to. That afternoon he picked up his daughter at 3:15, same as every day, because she didn't need to know yet that anything had changed. He let her talk the whole ride home about a spelling test, and he answered every question, and he didn't tell her a thing. Mid-June, 2 weeks after the firing, Keith found work at Dalton's Garage, a 4-bay shop on Chapman Highway that Frank Dalton had run for 30 years. No neon sign, just a wooden board painted by hand out front. Frank hired him on one answer to one question, what matters most when you're fixing a car for a stranger, and Keith had said, without pausing, that they were going to drive it home to someone who was waiting on them. The first week, Frank watched. Keith diagnosed a transmission fault on a Silverado by the sound of the engine alone, no code reader. He fixed a fuel injection problem on a BMW that Frank had given up on 2 weeks earlier, working from memory, hands moving like he was reading a blueprint only he could see. Frank didn't ask questions, but he started paying closer attention. One afternoon, straightening up the bay, Frank found Keith's toolbox lid cracked open. Under the wrenches, tucked in a side pocket where most men kept a spare fuse or a folded receipt, was a small photograph, corners soft with wear, like it had ridden in that pocket a long time. Keith in a Cummins-branded vest, standing with a team of engineers in front of a test engine, all of them squinting into the same sun. The name tag on his chest read K. Palmer, lead powertrain engineer. Frank held it a moment, the way you hold something you weren't meant to see, then read it again to make sure he hadn't misread it. Keith Palmer had once been the lead powertrain engineer at Cummins in Columbus, Indiana. 14 patents in diesel fuel injection systems. He'd run an 11-person research and development team. In 2021, his division was dissolved in a company-wide restructuring the same year his wife, Amy, died in a crash on Interstate 65. 2 losses inside 1 season. He didn't fight to transfer departments. Didn't appeal. He packed up, brought his daughter to Knoxville, Amy's hometown, and took the first job he found. Fleet mechanic, a tenth of what he used to make. Frank set the photo back where he found it, closed the lid. That afternoon he cleared the bay nearest the window best light in the shop, a clear view of the lot, and told Keith it was his from now on. No explanation. Keith didn't ask for one. After school that week, his daughter Grace sat on a stool by Frank's workbench, sorting bolts into a plastic tray by size. She told Frank about a stray cat living in the parking lot. It sleeps on the fuse box. I named it Voltage. Frank laughed a dry, rare sound. You like cats? Grace asked. I like somebody who names things right, Frank said. Under the truck nearby, Keith said nothing, but his shoulders came down for the first time since he'd walked out of Ridgeline. That same week, back at Ridgeline, Laura sat alone at her desk at 7:15 in the evening. A new report had come in Truck 9, same brake issue, same worn part number. She opened a drawer and pulled the paper file HR kept on Keith, the hard copy that ran parallel to the digital one. Inside was a handwritten maintenance request. Keith's writing, neat and level, dated mid-May. Replace brake pads, truck 14, worn past tolerance, urgent. The request existed. He had filed it at least once. But the digital system showed nothing. One paper form, one empty database. Laura set the page down and stared at it a long time. Someone had deleted it. And she needed to know who. If you've ever found out the truth only after it was too late to fix it clean, you already know the feeling waiting for Laura at the bottom of this drawer. Late June into early July, Laura started digging after hours. She pulled the maintenance budgets for the second and third quarters, both signed off by Doug. The line item for fleet brake pad replacement had been cut 40% quarter over quarter. Doug's justification read extended life cycle per manufacturer spec. Laura checked the actual manufacturer specs. There was no clause anywhere that allowed for extending brake pad life the way Doug had written it. He'd invented the language. She widened the search. Every deferred maintenance item over the past 3 quarters lined up with one of Doug's budget memos. 11 trucks, dozens of line items, 7 of them tied directly to safety systems, brakes, tires, steering. This wasn't a mistake made once. It was a pattern, repeated, on purpose. Laura built a table, dated every entry, and kept the file off the company server. That weekend, at a Kroger on Kingston Pike, Laura pushed her cart out to the lot under a sky going orange at the edges and saw Keith loading grocery bags into the bed of an old Ford pickup, clean, well kept, paint faded at the fender, a magnetic toolbox riding behind the cab like it never came off. His daughter sat in the cab, window down, feet swinging against the door panel, reading a book with the cover bent back. Keith saw her first. He paused, a bag in each hand, then nodded. Hey, you doing all right? Ordinary, like she was someone he knew from around, not the woman who'd signed the paper that ended his job 3 weeks earlier. Laura wasn't ready for that. She'd braced for a cold look, for him walking the other way, for silence with weight to it, the kind she thought she deserved. She hadn't braced for plain courtesy. "I'm good, thank you." Her eyes went to the cab. "She's gotten big." Keith followed her gaze. 9.5. She counts the half. A small smile, not for Laura, for his daughter, the kind of smile that only shows up when a man forgets for a second who's standing in front of him. He finished loading, nodded again, got in the truck. It pulled out of the lot, taillights catching the last of the evening light. Grace waved out the window, not at Laura, just at the world going by. The way kids wave at everything moving, at mailboxes and dogs and strangers alike. Laura stood by her own cart a moment longer than she needed to, watching the truck merge onto Kingston Pike, before she remembered she still had ice cream melting in a bag. That night, at her kitchen table, Laura laid it all out: Keith's handwritten form, Doug's budget sheets, the empty digital log, a mug of coffee going cold at her elbow. On a sticky note she wrote, "Who has authority to delete a request from the system?" 3 people. Herself. Doug, it admin. She hadn't done it. It admin had no reason to. That left one name, and she sat with it a long while before she let herself write it down. She looked at Keith's handwriting, level, careful, the writing of someone who'd spent a career putting things down on paper because words mattered to him, because a record only counted if it survived whoever came after it. Then she looked at her own signature on the termination form, 2 pages later in the same file, her own handwriting, nothing like his, quick and slanted, the signature of someone who'd signed 100 things that week without reading half of them. 2 signatures in one folder. She'd never checked a single page before she put her name under his. Through July, Laura widened the investigation past Truck 14. She pulled 8 months of fleet maintenance history. 11 trucks with deferred work, all tracing back to one of Doug's budget memos. 7 items tied to safety. She built a full table: date, truck, item, memo, signature. The pattern read like a map. Doug cut the safety budget, and when something broke, he erased the trail behind it. She called Pam Reedley in HR, over her lunch hour, door to her office shut. "Pam, I need to look back at how Keith Palmer's termination was processed. Who signed off, at each step?" Pam went quiet for 3 seconds too long for a question that should have had a simple answer. "That file, Doug handled that one directly. I just did the paperwork side. Printed it, got the signature. Standard process." Laura asked if she kept any paper copies outside the system. "I'd have to check," Pam said, and something in her voice had gone careful. "Let me call you back." She didn't call back that afternoon. She didn't call back the next day either. Laura noticed, and filed it away with everything else she was starting to notice. At Dalton's that same week, a customer brought in a Porsche Cayenne with a direct fuel injection fault. 2 other shops had turned it away, unable to diagnose it, one of them keeping the car 3 days before giving up. Keith popped the hood, listened to the engine idle, checked the rail pressure against a chart only he seemed to have memorized, and had it narrowed down in 15 minutes, a high-pressure rail regulator stuck open. He replaced it and recalibrated the ECU on his own laptop, an old one with a cracked corner that he kept in a case behind the seat. The customer, a real estate attorney named Tom Garrett, watched the whole thing without a word, arms folded, and said, "When Keith closed the hood, you're not exactly a regular mechanic." Keith wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm a regular mechanic." Tom left a business card on the bench anyway, weighted down under a socket wrench so it wouldn't blow off in the draft from the open bay. "If you ever need anything, anytime." Late one afternoon, Laura drove home along Chapman Highway and passed Dalton's, bay door open, fluorescent light spilling out into the dusk like something out of a memory she hadn't earned yet. Keith was under a car, only his boots and legs visible, a radio somewhere playing low. She slowed for 2 seconds, close enough to read the shop's hand-painted sign, then hit the gas. Not yet. She wasn't ready to explain what she was doing there, mostly because she still didn't know herself. The next day at Ridgeline, Doug called her into his office, door closed behind her before she'd even sat down. "I noticed you pulled the old fleet personnel file. That case is closed." Laura kept her voice level, folder held against her side where he couldn't see the tab. "I'm reviewing safety procedures, tied to Truck 9. Truck 9 is a routine maintenance issue. It has nothing to do with a closed personnel file." His tone was flat, almost bored, but his eyes weren't narrowed, measuring, tracking the folder without looking directly at it. Laura understood, without either of them saying it out loud, that Doug knew exactly what she was looking for, and that he'd known before she walked in. She nodded and left the office, and didn't breathe out until she was back at her own desk with the door shut. The warning didn't need words. If she kept digging, she was going to run into Doug before she reached the truth. Late July, Laura's Audi had started making a thin whine on startup, gone after a few minutes, the kind of sound a car makes right before it makes a much worse sound. She'd noticed it 2 weeks back and hadn't taken it in, too busy, too many files spread across her kitchen table every night, too many nights ending with her asleep at the table instead of in bed. At Ridgeline, Doug raised the pressure. In the monthly leadership meeting, he told the board that fleet safety oversight needed a full review, and asked, not looking away from Laura once, who had kept an underqualified technician on staff for 3 years without catching a problem. His voice stayed reasonable the whole time, which was worse somehow than if he'd raised it. He was building a story, brick by brick, in front of 7 people who trusted him. If the truth ever came out, he intended to take her down with him, and he wanted the record to already say so before it did. Laura worked late, left the office at 9:20, and drove Chapman Highway south the road she took home every night. 2 lanes, no streetlights past the 3rd mile, trees pressing in on both sides, radio off, because she'd stopped hearing it an hour ago anyway. At 9:43, the whine came back, louder this time, steady. The check engine light lit red. The voltage gauge dropped. Her headlights dimmed. She managed to steer onto the shoulder gravel and weeds, no real curb before the dashboard went dark completely. The engine died. Silence. She sat there in the dark, her phone at 8%. She called roadside assistance. 90 minutes, ma'am. Chapman Highway's outside our priority coverage zone. She turned the phone off to save the battery. The road was empty. Crickets. No shoulder lighting, no gas station in sight, just the smell of hot rubber drifting up from the engine. The first set of headlights passed. The second passed. The third slowed, then sped up again and kept going. Laura started calculating the walk to the nearest station 4 miles, in office shoes, on a dark road. A 4th set of headlights. The truck slowed, pulled onto the gravel ahead of her, maybe 10 yards up. Engine off, door open, work boots on the stones, a canvas jacket streaked with grease. Keith Palmer walked down the shoulder toward her car. He'd just finished a late shift. Frank had asked him to stay and finish up a Tacoma, and his daughter was home with Mrs. Jenkins next door. Same as every night, he ran late. He hadn't stopped because he knew it was her car. He'd stopped because someone was stranded on a dark road. He recognized her only when he reached the window, the headlamp on his cap catching her face through the glass. She recognized him at the same moment. A second passed. Neither spoke. Then Keith said, "Pop the hood." He leaned into the engine bay, the light from his headlamp cutting across a torn serpentine belt. Laura stood outside in the dark, watching the hands of the man she'd fired working on something she couldn't fix herself. Neither of them said anything. The night held very still. If you've ever needed a stranger to be kinder than you'd earned, this next part is for you. Keep watching. Keith checked the engine bay. The alternator belt had snapped clean. He walked back to the truck bed, where his toolbox carried the basics any mobile mechanic keeps close: a spare belt, filters, a backup flashlight. He replaced the belt under the beam of his headlamp, hands quick and exact, the same hands that had rebuilt a Porsche's fuel system that week, the same hands that had once designed engines at Cummins, now working under the hood of the car that belonged to the woman who'd fired him. Laura stood with her arms crossed. She didn't ask about Ridgeline. He didn't bring it up. They talked about the road instead. "I drive this every night," she said. "I've never seen it this dark." Keith, head still under the hood, said, "No lights past this stretch. Not many people stop." "Except you," Laura said. Keith didn't answer that. She asked about his daughter not out of politeness, but because she still remembered the girl in the truck cab at Kroger, waving out the window. Keith told her Grace had named the stray cat at the garage voltage. "Sleeps on the fuse box. She says it's a calico, so it brings the house luck." He said it plainly. like it was the most ordinary thing in the world not telling Laura a story, just answering a question about his kid, the way he would for anyone who asked. Laura didn't smile, but her mouth curved, just slightly the first moment between them that didn't have ridgelines sitting on top of it. Laura wanted to say something. He saw it, her breath changing, her mouth opening, then closing. Keith shook his head, just barely. Not here. No anger in it. Just not the time, not the place, not on a dark stretch of road built for saying nothing at all. He shut the hood. Try it now. The engine turned over. Headlights came back on. Keith wiped his hands on a rag. That belt'll hold for now. Get it replaced properly this week. He nodded once and walked back to his truck. He didn't wait to be thanked. Laura sat with the engine running, watching his taillights shrink down Chapman Highway. Her hands stayed on the wheel. She didn't pull away for 4 minutes. The next morning at 8:40, Pam Reedley called from a personal number, not the Ridgeline line. "I'm putting in my notice," Pam said. "Doug's marked my performance down 2 quarters running. No real cause. Just enough to push me out. I'm leaving by the end of the month." A pause. "But before I go, there's something you need to know." Pam told her Keith Palmer had filed 3 brake maintenance requests for Truck 14, 3 different weeks. Pam processed the paperwork side of things. She'd seen each form cross her desk, each one stamped denied with the initials D.K. Each time, the digital record disappeared from the system days later. Pam had kept the original paper copies locked in a drawer, 3 forms. She'd been scared to say anything. Doug controlled her performance reviews, and she was a single mother, raising 2 kids on that paycheck. Pam emailed scans from her personal account. 3 forms. Keith's handwriting, the dates, the content, each one stamped denied, each one signed off with Doug's initials, timestamps that couldn't be faked. Laura opened the file on her laptop. 3 requests, 3 warnings he'd tried to give, 3 times erased by the same hand. She'd fired him without ever checking a single hard copy. Laura put both hands flat on the table, stared at the 3 scanned pages on her screen, and sat there a long time, not crying, not speaking, just sitting with the full weight of what she'd done. Early August, Laura brought everything she had, Pam's paper forms, the budget records, the empty system logs to Ashford and Cole, the outside law firm Ridgeline kept on retainer. She laid it out plainly. Falsified maintenance records, budget cuts that compromised fleet safety, wrongful termination. The firm ordered IT forensics to pull the deletion logs from Ridgeline's maintenance system. 2 days later, the results came back: 3 deletion entries, same admin account, same IP address, all tracing to the computer in Doug Kendrick's 3rd-floor office. Laura drove out to Dalton's. On the surface, she was there to check the alternator. The roadside fix was only temporary. The belt needed a proper replacement. The real reason, she wasn't ready to name yet. Frank was at the counter when she walked in, heading straight for the bay by the window. Keith was under a Tacoma. He slid out at the sound of footsteps, saw her, stood, wiped his hands. "Alternator? Alternator," she said. He checked it. The temporary belt was holding, but it needed swapping out properly. 20 minutes. While he worked, Laura stood beside him, watching his hands, the same hands from Chapman Highway, the same precision. She left her personal number on the repair invoice. "In case anything comes up with the car." Keith looked at the number, folded the invoice, put it in his shirt pocket. He didn't say anything about it. "Do you drink coffee?" Laura asked. After you're done, Keith looked at her 3 seconds, weighing not the offer but the person making it. On Chapman Highway, she'd stood in the dark and watched him work without a single complaint, without rushing him, without giving orders. She hadn't said sorry out loud, but she'd stood there. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "It's just coffee, silence, fine." A small coffee shop on Market Square, a table by the window. Laura ordered an Americano. Keith ordered black. They talked not about Ridgeline, about Knoxville, about fall coming, about starting over. "Some things break clean," Keith said. "Some things break jagged. Clean breaks are easy to weld back. Jagged ones, you've got to grind both edges down first." Laura understood he wasn't talking about metal. Keith told her a little about Grace, how she sorted bolts by size at the shop, how she read in the truck cab while he worked. He didn't mention Amy, Laura didn't ask. But her eyes caught the pale band of skin on his left wrist where a wedding ring used to sit. He'd taken it off. The mark was still there. Laura didn't apologize. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wanted to fix it before she said a word. An apology without action was just noise. She left the coffee shop, drove back to Dalton's for her car. Frank was working in the next bay over. He looked at Laura, not at Keith, and said, "You know he held 14 patents at Cummins? Lead engineer. Ran an 11-person research team." Laura stopped walking. Frank kept going. "The fleet mechanic you had was the kind of engineer your company would have paid anything to keep, and you put him on the street." Frank didn't say anything else. He went back to work. Laura stood there a few seconds longer, then got in her car. That night, Doug found out Laura had gone to Ashford and Cole. He struck back, drafted a memo to the board claiming Laura Mitchell had approved fleet safety oversight herself, that she'd fired a competent technician without an adequate investigation, that she was the weak link in the whole matter. He sent it to every board member at 11:47 that night, marked urgent, confidential. If you've ever finally found the proof you needed only to watch the other side fight dirtier, stick with this one to the end. Mid-August. The Ridgeline boardroom, 10 in the morning, coffee cooling, untouched in front of most of the chairs. 7 members at the table. Doug spoke first, a printed memo, a confident voice, a hand pointing to a chart he'd clearly rehearsed pointing to. Laura Mitchell kept an underqualified technician on staff for 3 years. When an incident occurred, she fired the employee to cover the gap instead of auditing the system. Now she's trying to shift blame onto me to protect her own position. He laid out a timeline. His timeline, clean, logical on the surface, every date chosen to make hers look like an afterthought. Laura waited for him to finish. She let the silence after his last sentence sit a beat longer than was comfortable before she stood, unhurried, and set 3 things on the table, squaring each one so the board could read them without leaning forward. First, scanned copies of 3 handwritten maintenance requests, 3 different dates, all reading the same: replace brake pads, truck 14, worn past tolerance, urgent, each one stamped denied, each one signed with the initials DK. Second, a printed IT forensics report, 3 deletion entries, same admin account, same IP address, all belonging to Doug Kendrick. Third, the second and third quarter budget reports, Doug's signature on every line that cut safety spending. "Keith Palmer warned us 3 times, Laura said. Each time, the request was deleted from the digital system by the same person. I fired him based on data that had been manipulated. That's my failure, I never checked outside the system. But the person who manipulated the system, who cut the safety budget and erased the trail behind it, is Doug Kendrick." Doug lost his composure for the first time. Paper forms can be forged. Anyone could. Ridgeline's own attorney cut him off. The deletion log carries system-level timestamps that can't be altered from outside. All 3 deletion entries match the timing and content of these 3 paper forms exactly, and the IP address traces to the computer in your office. The board deliberated for 45 minutes. The vote came back 6-1. Doug Kendrick was terminated for fraud, falsification of safety records, and endangering employees. One board member moved to forward the file to the Federal Transportation Regulator. The board directed Laura to clear Keith Palmer's termination record entirely, issue full back pay for 3 months, and send a formal offer of reinstatement. That afternoon, at 5:30, Laura drove to Dalton's. Keith was under a Camry. She stood and waited, an envelope in her hand, no call ahead, no knock, just waiting. Keith slid out. Face streaked with grease, flannel sleeves rolled up. He saw Laura, saw the envelope. Stood, wiped his hands on a rag. Laura held it out. "The board cleared your record. Full back pay. A formal offer to come back. Same position, same salary." A pause. "You were right. I should have listened." Keith took the envelope, opened it, scanned the first page. Folded it, looked at her. "I appreciate this," he said, "but I don't want to come back." Laura looked at him. "You don't want to come back." Not a question, just repeating it to make sure she'd heard it right. The way you repeat a number back, to make sure you copied it correctly. She'd braced for relief, for thanks, maybe even for a request for more. She hadn't braced for no, and it took her a second to find her footing again. Keith set the envelope down on the workbench, next to a cold cup of coffee he hadn't gotten back to. He explained it plainly, the way he explained most things, no more words than the situation needed. These last 3 months I found something I hadn't had since Amy died. Mornings I want to get up for. Not because I have to, because I want to. Frank gave me the bay by the window. Grace has a cat to feed in the parking lot. I fix people's cars and they drive home safe. That's enough. He looked around the shop, the bays, the oil smell, the late light coming through the window and lying across the concrete floor in long gold stripes. I don't need Ridgeline. Silence. Then Keith, quieter. You could have mailed this. Why'd you drive out here? Laura didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. A school bus rumbled outside. The bay door was wide open. Grace ran in, backpack bouncing, ponytail loose, sneakers muddy at the toes. Dad. Then she saw Laura, stopped, tilted her head, sizing up the stranger the way kids do. Are you the car lady? This is a friend, Keith said. Grace accepted that instantly. No further questions needed. Do you like cats? Not waiting for an answer. My cat's named Voltage. She sleeps on the fuse box. Dad says she's a calico, so she brings good luck. Grace pulled Keith's phone from his shirt pocket, she knew the passcode, and swiped to a photo of Voltage. A calico cat curled on top of an electrical box, eyes shut, tail draped over the wiring. Laura crouched down, level with Grace, hands on her knees. She looked at the photo. Grace pointed out each patch. That's the orange part. That's the black part. That's the white part. 3 colors means good luck in the house, mister, Frank says. Laura said. Mr. Frank's right about that. Frank watched from the small office in the corner of the garage, through the glass, a cup of coffee in his hand, black, no sugar, same as Keith's. He saw Grace crouched down, showing Laura the photo, saw Keith standing nearby, hands still dirty, not walking away. He took a sip, went back to his paperwork. Laura stood. I should get going. Thanks for showing me Voltage, Grace said. Come back sometime. Voltage likes new people. Laura looked at Keith. Keith looked at Laura. No nod, no wave. Just a look. She got in her car and drove off. Grace watched the Audi pull out. She's nice, Dad. Keith didn't answer, but he stood there watching the car until it disappeared around the bend in Chapman Highway. If you've ever watched something slow and quiet turn into something real without either person saying a word, this last part is for you. 3 weeks later, mid-September, Ridgeline Logistics had changed. A dual maintenance process now ran paper alongside digital, with no single person able to delete either one alone. 2 new technicians on staff. Independent safety audits every month. Laura never told Keith, but inside the company's internal system, the new process carried a name, the Palmer Protocol. Laura brought her car in for an oil change. Nothing wrong with it, just routine. She carried 2 coffees black for Keith, an Americano for herself, set them on the workbench without a word. Keith took his, drank, kept working. It had become a pattern by then. She brought the coffee, he changed the oil, and they talked about the weather, about Voltage, about a bridge getting repaved on Chapman Highway, about a book Grace was reading. Neither of them put a name to whatever was sitting quietly between the 2 coffee cups. Thursday evening, Grace had the science fair at Bearden Elementary. Keith had spent the whole week helping her build it. A working model of an alternator, magnets, coiled wire, a shaft that turned by hand, a small light that lit up when she cranked it. Nobody said the word irony out loud, but it sat there anyway. At 5:45, Keith walked out to the lot. The truck wouldn't turn over. Second, try a single click, nothing else. Starter motor, dead. The best mechanic in Knoxville stood in front of a truck that wouldn't move, and the fair started at 6:30. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, stopped on one name, the same name from a repair invoice a month back. For the first time he called her. Laura. Keith? Her voice shifted surprise, then focus. Grace's science fair starts in 45 minutes. My truck's dead. A half-second of quiet. Laura said, I'll be there in 15 minutes. 12 minutes later, her Audi new alternator, New belt pulled up outside Dalton's. Keith and Grace climbed in. Grace sat in the middle, arms wrapped around a poster board model of an alternator, talking without stopping. Laura, do you know how an alternator works? It turns spinning motion into electricity. Like when the engine's running, the alternator makes power for the whole truck. Laura, eyes on the road, mouth curving slightly, said, I do know. Someone fixed the alternator in my car on a dark road once. The gymnasium at Bearden Elementary was lit bright, 20 tables set up in rows. Grace presented her model, cranking the shaft, the light bulb glowing, her voice steady and sure. An alternator turns mechanical energy into electrical energy. Without it, the car runs, but nothing else works. Laura stood beside her, holding the poster steady. Keith stood behind them, arms crossed, watching his daughter explain electromagnetic theory to the judges with the full confidence of a 9-and-a-half-year-old. One of the judges, a fourth-grade teacher, looked at Laura holding the poster, then at Keith standing behind them. Are you Grace's mom? Laura looked at Keith. Keith looked at Laura. Before either of them could answer, Grace said, Not yet. Nobody corrected her. The judge laughed and moved on to the next table. Keith looked down. Laura looked away, but neither of them said no. Out in the parking lot, September air, leaves just starting to turn across Knoxville, Grace walked between them, poster board in one hand, and reached for Laura's other hand without thinking about it, the way kids reach for whoever's closest. Laura didn't pull away. Keith saw it. Laura knew he saw it. They walked toward the car. 3 long shadows stretched out under the streetlight. Nobody said anything. Some things break and can be fixed. Some things break and you learn to carry the crack. And sometimes, on a dark stretch of road, somebody pulls over not because they know who needs help, but because they know who they are. The hardest distance was never the miles on Chapman Highway. It was the one they'd both built themselves. But sometimes all it takes is standing still in the dark and waiting. Neither of them had planned any of this, but neither of them walked away.